Is Sri Lanka on track to access funds from the IMF? Sri Lanka, which is currently facing an economic crisis, is headed for another major turbulence as the country will not be able to secure the much-needed IMF loan in December, as its ally and creditor China is yet to initiate a dialogue on debt restructuring with Colombo. A report in the Hindustan Times quoting financial analysts based in Washington said that Sri Lanka will miss the IMF deadline and will have to wait till March next year to secure a loan of $2.9 billion as Beijing was involved in the 20th National Party Congress. The next meeting of the IMF Executive Board is in March 2023. Sri Lanka will most likely have to wait until then for IMF board approval and access to funds. Why is China's involvement so important to access IMF funds? Sri Lanka is now considered as a country that defaulted on its external debt because the island nation lacked the foreign reserves for debt servicing. According to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka and the Finance Ministry, Sri Lanka's total debt was $36 billion at the end of 2021. Of this total debt, Colombo owes some 52% in bilateral credit to China, 19.5% to Japan, and 12% to India. One of the main conditions for Sri Lanka to tap the $2.9 billion funding from the International Monetary Fund is debt reconciliation and restructuring. Bilateral means transactions between two countries, and there is an institution that operates with the support of the International Monetary Fund to talk about bilateral debt, and this is called the Paris Club. Sri Lanka has obtained a large amount of loans from Japan, India and China, and from among them, only Japan is a member of the Paris Club. India is openly supporting Sri Lanka's engagement with the IMF, and avenues are open for Sri Lanka to discuss debt reconciliation and restructuring with its neighbour. However, the issue lies with China. Sri Lanka has to engage with China on how to restructure the debt given by China.
China's lending is based on a policy where if the debt is not settled, greater loans will be offered to settle it. But the solution is to restructure debt and extend the settlement period. They will not offer a haircut on debt. That is why China is offering a loan on top of a loan. But the IMF is not expecting that. China's policy will not be altered simply because we are connected with the IMF. There are no relaxed conditions. They will offer any amount, but we will be in a crisis when we hit a roadblock when settling the debt. Then they will dictate their terms.
නමුත් ඒක ආපහු ගෙවීමේදී යම් කිසි ප්‍රශ්නයක් වුණොත් එහෙම එතෙන්දි තමයි අල්ලගන්නේ. ඒගොල්ලෝ කියනවා අපි අපිට ඕන විදිහට තමයි ඒගොල්ලෝ කරන්න ඕනේ කියලා.
අපිට දැන් ආණ්ඩුවෙන් කියලා නැහැ IMF දීලා තියෙන ටාගට් එක.
The government has not disclosed the targets of the IMF. All the creditors must reach an agreement. If China or India says they will slash 40%, they need to give assurance that all three creditors have agreed to it. China has made it clear that there will be no reduction and will either reduce the interest or offer another loan to settle the existing loan or extend the interest period. The IMF says that our debt is unsustainable. We will only get $2.9 billion after we reach sustainable levels.
කියලා තියෙනවා ඒක. මේ ඩොලර් 2.9 හම්බ වෙන්නේ ඒ එකඟතාවය හම්බ වුණාට පස්සේ.
What has Sri Lanka done with Chinese loans? Sri Lanka used loans from China to invest in the Hambantota port, Mattala Airport, Lotus Tower in Colombo and expressways. Unfortunately, the return on investment was not enough to service the Chinese debt. Some of these projects have been handed over to China, labeling them as investments. However, the debt is yet to be settled. The IMF has informed Sri Lanka to boost its revenue streams so that debt can be serviced. The IMF also looks at cutting down on state expenditure and eradicating corruption to consider releasing funds to Sri Lanka.
When we speak of restructuring government institutions, they only speak of selling off the profit-making ventures and never speak of developing the loss-making institutions. The government is not speaking about fraud and corruption. The government is not speaking about recovering the millions and billions looted from the country. Is the government speaking about transparency in providing lands for development? Are they speaking of developing the capital market to support businesses? Who would launch a business with a loan at 30% interest? On one side, businesses are taxed. The president must not assume that we are on top of a glacier. We are on top of a volcano that can explode at any moment.
According to former Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Pires, legitimacy of the government is also crucial.
රජයේ ලොකු බලාපොරොත්තුවක් තියෙනවා.
The government hopes to obtain the IMF funds before the end of this year. However, the IMF has repeatedly said that the legitimacy of the government is a crucial factor. They stress the aid is for the people of the country and not the government. They have made it clear about their position on the mandate. The election will decide on the mandate.
ඒ අය බොහොම පැහැදිලිව ප්‍රකාශ කළා. මේ ජනවරම සම්බන්ධයෙන් තීරණාත්මක සාධකය වන්නේ මැතිවරණ.
There are three major factors that influence the approval of the IMF Executive Board for Sri Lanka to access funds: debt relief from China, taking necessary measures to prevent corruption, and legitimate government representing the true mandate of the people. Will it be possible to satisfy these three requirements, no matter how the issue of income and expenditure is resolved?
This is not as easy as we think. It cannot be done in 2 to 3 months. The IMF will not accept this even though we say we have restructured our debt. There are internationally accepted norms about the restructuring method. You have to comply with those standards. This is a very difficult task. Therefore, since we are talking about the solution, we are safe as long as we work assuming that we do not have the IMF with us. I am sorry to say that the central bank and the Ministry of Finance are in economic extremism. They only think about one side. There is a basic problem that taxes are increasing. What happens to industries when taxes are increased? What happens to businesses? They don't care what happens to the professionals. The country is heading for a major social explosion and we are unaware of that.
මොකද්ද වෘත්තීය වේදියට වෙන්නේ කියලා හොයන්නේ. නැත්තම් අපිව නොදැනි මහා සමාජ පිපිරීමකට රට ගමන් කරන.
Against this backdrop, is it possible to manage the economy further by relying on the IMF itself?